Closet, a Todd Mills mystery. Book 1. Author R.D. Zimmerman. Publisher Scribble Pub, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 27. If by night it was heaven, all sequins and heels, makeup and lush song, then by day it was hell. Starched shirts and neckties. Jeff wedged his finger into his tight collar, tugged at it, tried to get a little breathing room. Oh God, how he hated this corporate bondage. Though he had no desire whatsoever to get his you-know-what chopped off, he much preferred his life as Tiffany Crystal, chanteuse extraordinaire, to Jeff Barnes, the bank teller. Oh, confusion. Oh, dilemma. That was the story of his life. Of course he was a guy, and of course he was gay. But could he help it if he just loved the glamour of beautiful, sparkly clothes? Did it really matter if he didn't happen to look so absolutely fab in a gown and wig? An elderly woman appeared at his teller window, and Jeff looked up, smiled. Sorry, ma'am. I just closed. See, my light's off. Oh, yes, sorry. Barb right down there can help you. Oh, yes, I see. The customer moved down 2 windows while Jeff continued counting his drawer of funds and making sure everything added up just right. He prided himself on never being off, which was one reason he'd become the bank's star teller. He never broke any rules, but he couldn't help it just now. And he looked around, reached up, and strictly against bank policy undid his top button. Either the damn shirt had shrunk or he'd gained still more weight. So what if he was going to look a tad casual? If one of the managers questioned him about that upper button, Jeff would just say it was his lunch hour, which it was. Never mind that today, unlike any other, Jeff was taking part of his break right here at his window, while the head teller, Sue Bayer, was gone for her lunch. There was something Jeff had to find. No stroll for Jeff along downtown's Nicollet Mall today. No sitting outside and leisurely eating his sandwich. He just needed to find and take care of one little document tied to Michael's death. Carefully sorting the cash drawer, Jeff ascertained that he'd made no errors. Next, he locked up the drawer, but he didn't sign off on his computer, for this was the perfect time for him to do his snooping. The lunch hour had brought in a good crowd of office workers, and Barb and the other 2 tellers now on duty at First Midwestern were swamped, which meant they'd more than likely be too busy to notice what Jeff was doing over here. He glanced at the rear offices and saw that they were empty, just as he'd figured. The bulk of the staff was gone for this hour. There was one manager, Mr. Uptight, what's his name, at one of the front desks, and surely the receptionist was at her desk as well. Aside from the guard by the front door, that was it. This indeed was the time to do the research which he most definitely knew had to be completed today. Not long before his death, Michael had come to Jeff and asked a few questions that scared the hell out of Jeff. Ever the ethical accountant, Michael had stumbled upon something, a trail of dollars, and he'd followed it all the way to First Midwestern, which was why poor Michael had been killed. Good Lord. Hacked up like a fish just because of what he'd discovered. It made Jeff sick, but looking back on it, there was nothing he could have done to prevent it. Jeff studied his computer screen and scrolled through some commands, knowing full well that he'd be fired on the spot for doing this, or dropped in jail. Which would be a real drag, because he knew a queen like him would have a rough time in prison. But it was all coming to a head, and he had to act quickly. His hands flying across the keyboard, he punched in the name, and the account appeared immediately on the monitor. Okay, he thought, as he read. Everything still looked legit. Good. No one had monkeyed with anything. As far as he could tell, no one had suspected. No one had even looked at the account since Michael's death. He scrolled down, bringing up the entire transaction history, and there it was. Slightly over $700,000, and every penny of it still there. Bravo! Someone was pretty fucking rich, and he couldn't hide a smug smile, because he knew who that was. Oh, he thought it was just so brilliant. He'd have to swing by Saks and buy a new gown. Sure, he'd celebrate in real style. He glanced around. No big deal. With a couple of quick keystrokes, he entered the command. A few seconds later, he could hear the printer in the back beginning to hum away. This was the only part he was nervous about, and he scurried away from his computer. There'd be questions if a manager saw him printing out someone's account record, particularly this one. And there'd be trouble if Jeff was spotted stuffing that printout into his pocket. All the information filled up 3 pages. Jeff stood by the laser printer, collected each page as it came spitting out. Then, as if it were perfectly normal business, he took the pages back to his teller window. There he feigned interest in the papers. Just checking on a possible discrepancy, he'd say, if anyone asked, circling some numbers, running a finger down one column, and when no one was watching, he folded the sheets in half. Okay, out of here, he thought. He signed off on the computer, nabbed the documents, and waltzed off. See you, Barb, he called to one of the tellers. I'll be back in 30. She glanced over as she counted out something, saying, Bye now. Less than 5 minutes later, his brown paper lunch sack in hand, Jeff was making his way quickly through the skyway. There was a bit of a chill in the air, nothing like what was coming in a month or two, for sure, but the system of interior second-floor corridors that linked most of the buildings was pretty full. Jeff strolled along, passing from his bank building across the glassed-in pedestrian bridge and toward City Center. He paused once, zeroing in on a flashy display of women's shoes. God, he thought, the shiny gold ones with the clear plastic heels were magnificent. They'd go perfectly with one of Tiffany's dresses. But were those clear, spiky heels strong enough to hold someone of Tiffany's voluptuous proportions? Later, doll, he told himself. The big party would come later, but for now, there was more important things. The skyway splintered off, and instead of heading across 6th Street towards City Center, he followed a narrow corridor into a more anonymous building. Passing through a double door, he took a left at a copy shop, and then, just before the sub shop, turned down a little corridor, a dead-end passage that led to some storerooms or something. He liked this payphone down here. Except for Jeff, no one ever used it, and no one was ever lingering about and listening in, which was quite different than at the bank, where you couldn't say a peep back in the employee lounge without being overheard. That was why Jeff always used his phone for his private transactions. He dropped a quarter into the phone, looked up and down the little hall, and dialed the number. Just after the third ring, a deep voice said, Hello? Hi, gorgeous. It's moi, said Jeff, feeding Tiffany. Is that really you? I'm speechless. Truly I am. Tell me it isn't so. Tell me I haven't reached your answering machine. Did you check? Oh, I did indeed. And it's all there? All of it. All that luscious money, replied Jeff with a soft, heated laugh. More than I could ever spend in a month. Great. Then I'll pick you up tonight. The show's over at midnight. I'll be waiting just off 4th. Kiss, kiss, said Jeff into the phone. See you then, sweet prince. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.